Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Barbara Valockova. I'm a postdoctoral fellow here at the Center on Asia and Globalization, LKYSPP School of Public Policy. And I will be serving as a moderator for today's Counterpoint Southeast Asia panel discussion. So for those of you joining us for the first time, Counterpoint Southeast Asia is a seminar and policy brief series that addresses questions of strategic significance to Southeast Asia by putting together diverse perspectives from invited experts from the region. And each issue of Counterpoint tackles a crucial topic. And today specifically, we are addressing the question of, is ASEAN ready for Timor-Leste? So, as you know, on October 26 this year, Timor-Leste became ASEAN's 11th member, the first expansion since Cambodia in 1999. And this accession is both a milestone and a test. So Timor-Leste brings democratic credentials and commitment to international law, but faces significant challenges, such as depleting oil reserves and hundreds of legal instruments to implement. So today's question asks whether ASEAN is ready for Timor-Leste, but reveals something deeper. Can the bloc integrate the most vulnerable member while managing development gaps and maintaining unity? So to help us address these questions today, we have invited 3 speakers. And before I introduce them, I would like to remind each of them that they have 10 to 12 minutes to present their key arguments. After each speaker is done with the presentation, we will open the floor to questions and discussion. So with these points in mind, I'll proceed to briefly introduce the speakers in the order in which they will present. So these are brief introductions to their full impressive profiles. You can refer to their biographies at the CHG website. To begin with, we have Ms. Julia Lau, who is Senior Fellow and Coordinator of the Indonesia Studies Program at the ICS Yusof Ishak Institute, where she also edits the fulcrum.sg ICS Commentary and Analysis website. Then we have our second speaker, Mr. Johan Pahlepi, who is a research associate at the Center for International Law here at NUS. From 2017 to 2024, he served as a legal officer at the ASEAN Secretariat. And last but not least, we have Dr. Dennis Hu, who is a senior research fellow at CAG here at the LKYSPP School of Public Policy. Prior to taking up his current appointment as Senior Research Fellow, Dennis was Director of the APEC Policy Support Unit from 2011 to 2022. So we have a great lineup with us today. And let's start with Julia, who will share her perspective on what Timor-Leste brings to ASEAN. Julia, the floor is yours.
I'll wait a while. Bom dia. That's how they say hello in Timor. I've had the chance to go there twice. It's nice to be on an NUS campus, even though this was not where I went to law school. I'm that much of a dinosaur that law school was still on Kent Ridge, but you're moving back to Kent Ridge. So it's good to be here. Thank you, Barbara, for inviting me. I've warned her that I'm, as a law grad, constitutionally unable to keep to my notes, but I will try to sketch out both what will appear in a written form soon in your Counterpoint newsletter, but as a person who's trained both in international law and international relations, I will sketch out broadly, if you will, what accession for ASEAN means to Timor and why maybe they wanted this. And also, to answer today's question, is ASEAN ready for Timor? I'll ask a few sub-questions, and we can talk about that in the Q&A if you wish. I know that my second and third colleagues will talk in much more technical detail about the laws and about the economy, so I won't go there. But the other difference is, I think, partly because I've been to Timor twice, I have friends who are there now, and they're not just Timorese, but also I've had the chance and opportunity because of my work to meet people like Timor's ambassador to Singapore. I've had a sort of front door or first row seat to some of that. Not a super high VIP seat, but it's exciting because it is a momentous event. Anytime a regional organization welcomes a new member, despite knowing that the journey will be difficult, right, on both sides. A bit like a marriage, or if you prefer on Facebook, it's complicated, that kind of relationship. So, two burning questions, right? Is ASEAN ready for Timor, and is Timor ready for ASEAN? So if you will, the 14-year accession journey for Timor was in part to answer that question. Is Timor ready for ASEAN? I know that my second colleague will argue that Timor is maybe not quite ready, and so will my third. But I will say, in terms of development, in terms of indicators, if you look at Timor's Freedom House ranking, for instance, for democracy, it is the highest in Southeast Asia. If you look at Timor's ranking for Transparency International's Corruption Perceptions Index, it is not the worst in Southeast Asia. No prizes for guessing who might fare worse than Timor. You can just Google it. Don't read the AI summary, read the real thing. So on some indicators, Timor is already, in my view, and as I argued about 2.5 years ago, stronger than Laos, Vietnam, Myanmar, and Cambodia when they joined in the mid to late 1990s when I was a law student at NUS Law. So to me, this, in some ways, spurious argument, they are not ready. They are not ready because they are not developed. One way to counter that argument is, well, most of Southeast Asia also is not developed today, even today, in 2025, right? The other part is, what is accession to Timor? I think from an I-law and IR point of view, it's about recognition, right? So what is a state? If you teach IR 101, even at the grad level, a state is a state because other states recognize it. In that sense, accession to ASEAN provides Timor status and recognition. We are recognizing Timor, we meaning the other 10 AMS, except for the naughty one who we won't talk about, but who's upset about Timor for separate reasons. Timor's emplacement, if you will, or accession to ASEAN is a step in the right direction because it completes the geographical map. Proximity is actually one of the requirements for membership, right? Other countries want to join. But if you're in Latin America, sorry, tough luck. Try a different place. So interestingly, in 2025, when I was a law student, we used to look at the EU. Even when I was a grad student, as late as 2014, ASEAN was held up as a bad or poor example or weak example of a regional organization. If you study international institutionalism, EU at that point was considered, de rigueur, right? The sort of best example. But today, the tables have turned a little bit, I think. This is not to put a rose-tinted, tinge on everything, but I think these are important things to say. Development, I'll let Dennis deal with because I think he'll talk about that a lot more. I think Timor's accession to ASEAN also provides ASEAN with an interesting leg into the worlds of the EU and the CPLP. If you don't know what that is, you can Google it too. They speak Portuguese. Why do they speak Portuguese? So I've had conversations with Timorese diplomats and academics. It was a conscious choice. So I remember being a very young analyst when Timor split away from Indonesia. And all of us were waiting to see what are their official languages. And then they announced Tetum and Portuguese, and all of us went, not English? So now they're finding out it's difficult, because after all, one of the official languages is English for ASEAN, but not just ASEAN, for the United Nations as well. They're having a hard time with some of that. They have language training for diplomats and bureaucrats, which is necessary. But when the Timorese friends explained to me, we chose Portuguese, yes, even though there are problems with that in and of itself, because it privileges those of Portuguese descent or a certain elite group in Timor. We chose Portuguese to show we are not Indonesia. We chose Portuguese to show we are linked to a different history. That's interesting. And it together with the Catholic identity, together with other different cultural and, if you will, social norms, Timor makes for a very interesting newcomer. The young people in the room, one guy at the back that I know from a trip to Dili, we had a good time at the conference. I do encourage you to please, if you have a Singapore passport, no need visa, no need to pay $30. Please visit Timor. Please go and enjoy the lovely waters of the Coral Triangle. So why am I so optimistic in this sense? I think Timor will be a young, That's factually true, right? They are among the youngest, if not the youngest population. Almost 40% are under 15. But why are they so young? The sad history is they've had a very violent and turbulent domestic past, including that of colonialism. That's why they're so young. A lot of people were killed. But if you go today, they're not type A like Singaporean people. They want sustainable tourism. Please go there and visit them in a sustainable way. And I think you will feel the spirit of Timor. Now, I sound like a complete rabid fan of Timor, but that's because I am. And I wanted to ask this at the start, but you all look very serious, so now I can ask, because some of you are smiling. How many people are optimists in the room? Just good, good. That's higher than the usual proportion of Singaporeans. How many people are pessimists? Oh, no one there to admit. Okay. Oh, good, Dennis. So why am I optimistic, even though there are problems that my colleagues will tell you about? On the ASEAN side, I'm optimistic because for some of the burning questions I have, and I will just finish the last 2-3 minutes on this, these are the questions I think ASEAN needs to answer. Is ASEAN ready to adjust to its most democratic member? Is ASEAN, I love you, whoever you are, because you're already laughing and smiling. I got at least one fan. ASEAN may or may not be ready for tough conversations, blunt conversations with Timorese diplomats. And they are blunt, especially if it's closed door. Even if it's not closed door, if you want, follow Ramos-Horta's Facebook page. It is amazing. He singles out people and countries for criticism. But what I mean by this is, joking aside, is that I think ASEAN is at this critical juncture. Can we walk the talk? We have all these conventions, we have all these charters, agreements, all that I've studied since I was a law student here. Do we mean what we say? It's time to act, right? Second tough question, is ASEAN ready to absorb one of the most youthful populations that is, at this point, undertrained, undereducated? My flip side of that worry is, I worry that Timor will have a brain drain, which will be the worst thing, a bit like Indonesia, if that happens. I worry about that. And that, for the econs people, they can figure that out. Finally, it's a small point, maybe, or actually maybe the largest point. Is ASEAN ready for the most tolerant, in a way, new member? Timor, with the Philippines and Thailand, is one of the few countries that has an annual Pride Parade. They end at the presidential palace, even though they are majority Catholic. The president welcomes all people and calls them all Timor's children. Are we ready for tolerance, but in a sort of exercise manner? And I'm not trying to put a nice sheen on things, but this is what I've experienced of Timor. Nobody bothers you. It's a fairly safe place with caveats. But I think if we choose to be pessimists, we're not going to give this new country a chance. But I think if we are collectively slightly more optimistic, then Singapore and other ASEAN countries can help Timor and make that adjustment, right, to the 11th member on both sides more palatable. So I'll stop there, Barbara. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Julia, for your optimistic assessment of Timor-Leste's membership. And now, building on this foundation, I'll turn to Johan, who offers a different lens focused on the legal and procedural dimensions of this accession. Johan, please share your thoughts.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Johan from CIL. So today I would like to share my comments on what happened 10 days ago in Kuala Lumpur, especially related to the accession of Timor-Leste to ASEAN. Well, I have to admit, this was a milestone, but it has also exposed a problem. ASEAN's current approach to admission has become procedurally problematic. When we talk ASEAN membership, this is not only about ceremonial. ASEAN is no longer a gentleman's club. It's an intergovernmental organization with a set of rights and obligations. As of today, there are around 400 legal instruments. Most of them are legally binding. And it means they are low to 10 ASEAN member states. So when this happens, of course, to protect ASEAN rules-based identity, we must respect what ASEAN Charter said. According to the ASEAN Charter, the governance of this so-called admission governed under Article 6. So today I will only focus on Article 6, Paragraph 1. According to Article 6, Paragraph 1, there must be a rules of procedure for the admission of the new ASEAN member state. And it must be prescribed by ASEAN Coordinating Council or the Foreign Minister of 10 ASEAN member states. Those procedures should set out how the applications are made, how negotiations are sequenced, which organ participate, and how accession interacts with ASEAN legal instruments. However, as of today, I haven't seen the state accession procedure. What ASEAN did, when they are dealing with Timor-Leste, they are actually using this so-called roadmap on Timor-Leste accession to ASEAN, adopted in 2023. In my opinion, this document is political documents, not legally binding document at all. It's also create a problem, when you look into the text of the, the roadmap, it's also require Timor-Leste to accede to a terminated legal instrument, which is impossible. It's that agreement. How come you becoming party to this debt instrument? And the second one, they also require Timor-Leste to accede to non-legal instrument. This is also impossible to be done. And of course, when we talk about ASEAN membership, right, there are around 400 legal instruments. 200 of them belong to the agreement concluded between ASEAN, among ASEAN member states, and another 200 is belong to the agreements between ASEAN and its dialogue partners. For the agreements concluded among ASEAN member states, it spans within 3 communities: political security, economic community, and socio-cultural. So the problem is, when Timor-Leste becoming ASEAN member state 10 days ago, they only acceded into 3 legal instruments. The first one is TAC in 2007, and the second one is SONFES, and the third one is ASEAN Charter. However, 10 ASEAN member states, they are parties to 400 legal instruments. When you talk about ASEAN Charter, all member states shall have equal right and obligation. So in this position, it means that Timor-Leste cannot have equal position, equal right and obligation. Of course, they can join ASEAN organs, they can join the summit, they can join ASLOM, they can join SIOM, and etc. However, they don't have enough vehicle. For example, in the economic community, because they are not parties to ATIGA. Of course, they don't bind to the set of rules about trade in goods or even trade in services. So now it's becoming a problem, Well, the question is, how should we do the accession in ASEAN correctly? So in my opinion, for Timor-Leste, first of all, they need to accede to all ASEAN political security and ASEAN socio-cultural community legal instruments. There are around 40 legal instruments. And also, they need to accede to core legal instrument under ASEAN economic communities. So they don't have to enter into 100 legal instruments at the first time, but at least they need to enter into ATIGA, ASEAN Trade in Goods, ATISA, ASEAN Trade in Services, and also AKIA, ASEAN Trade on ASEAN Comprehensive and Safe Investment Agreement. Another thing that you need to see is that there are around 200 legal instruments concluded between ASEAN and its external partners. And the problem is that as of today, Timor-Leste not member or parties to this legal instrument. So it's creating a problems also. As you know, when 10 ASEAN member states becoming parties to this legal instrument, but Timor-Leste is not, again, this is asymmetries. As a member state, you need to have like equal right and obligation. So the problem is that Timor-Leste not really have full right and obligation. both under ASEAN legal instrument and also ASEAN external legal instrument. So what needs to be done for the future is that ASEAN, when they are dealing with another accession, for example, they need to make some adjustment. First of all, they need to have a proper accession procedure. You cannot rely on the roadmap, because this roadmap is, what do you call it? It's just a political document. It's only list the political expectation, which in my opinion doesn't make sense. Because ASEAN is a rules-based organization, you need to stick to the rules. According to the rules, you should have this so-called accession procedure. So let's do it. And I know that when I don't know whether I should say this or not, but when I was still at the Secretariat, I remember that the Secretariat drafted this so-called accession procedure. But I don't know what's happened next to this accession procedure. But in the end of the day, yes, Timor-Leste already acceded into ASEAN Charter. And of course, according to the Charter itself, they are already becoming 11 ASEAN member states. But the problem is that they don't have full right and obligation. So I will stop here, and I would like to hear your comment and question. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Johan, for your legal analysis. And now we'll hear from Dennis, who will elaborate on the economic challenges, and he will show you a few slides as well.
Well, first of all, thank you for coming at this late afternoon. So I'm not a lawyer, so I'm an economist by training. So it does seem like Johan has raised some concerns about the accession, but I'm going to just assume that on the 26th of October, during the ASEAN Summit, Timor-Leste has acceded to become the 11th member of ASEAN. And with that, I work on that premise to kind of draw out some of the benefits that Timor-Leste would have as being part of ASEAN on the economic side, as well as some of the challenges that it will face in the years to come. As what Johan said, so once Timor essentially becomes parties to some of these economic legal instruments like ATIGA, the ASEAN Trade in Goods Agreement, or the other important agreements like the investment agreement, the ASEAN Comprehensive Investment Agreement, and of course eventually the ASEAN Economic Community Agreement, it will enjoy quite a number of benefits, right? One, of course, will be having market access to a huge regional market in ASEAN, which is almost a $4 trillion economy collectively. And of course, most within ATIGA itself, 99% of its goods that's being traded among its members is duty-free. So again, it would have lower import costs as well as duty-free access for Timor's exports to the rest of ASEAN. It can also eventually leverage on the numerous numbers of free trade agreements that ASEAN is party of, particularly the ASEAN +1 agreements, ASEAN-China, which recently has been upgraded, and of course RCEP eventually, which includes China, Japan, Korea, Australia, and New Zealand, which is one of the largest free trade, is the largest actually free trade agreement in the world. And also by being part of ASEAN, it would also attract significant foreign direct investments into the region, whether it's from other ASEAN companies, or as well as multinationals from a region, particularly as being part of that, hopefully part of that regional production network that's already quite well established in ASEAN, particularly in the manufacturing sector. It also gives an opportunity as being its newest member for ASEAN to kind of relook at the current approaches that has been done in terms of narrowing the development gap, particularly when it's back in the 90s when Cambodia, Myanmar, and Laos joined ASEAN, including Vietnam. So it gives them an opportunity to kind of reevaluate the effectiveness of many of these capacity building programs, particularly under the IAI initiative, the Initiative for ASEAN Integration, which is the main mechanism to try to reduce that disparity among various ASEAN member states. I guess the other economic front issue is that I think there were some concerns, and this is more geopolitical. There was some concerns that that Timor was moving closer to China and that of course raised concerns by the U.S. and Australia. I mean, I used to work at APEC for 12 years, so Timor is not a member of APEC, but PNG is, and when APEC was hosted there back in 2019, you do see a lot of Chinese investments. China aid was kind of plastered everywhere. Even the convention center where the APEC meeting was held was built by China aid. So I think so one of the concerns that ASEAN member states do have, and I think Timor may share that concern, is that they really don't want to take sides between whether it's US, China, or others. So by being part of ASEAN, it gives them that kind of, I would say, kind of a protection, in terms of ASEAN's always prided itself on its strategic neutrality. The term that's always been used is ASEAN centrality. So by being part of ASEAN, in a way, it kind of provides that kind of protection of being neutral, not having to choose a side, but doing business with everyone, right? That's what ASEAN has been great at doing. Now let's look at some of the economic challenges that Timor will face. I mean, it's a $1.8 billion economy. It's the smallest economy in ASEAN. It hasn't been a great economic performer in the last couple of years. So has some of the other countries, particularly Cambodia and Laos. I think I just put up a chart to just show you the big differences among them. I don't know whether it's up there. Okay, so this is just in GDP per capita, but in terms of purchasing power parity. So the numbers are a little higher than just looking at current terms in US dollars. But you can see from here, Timor is the poorest, not that much poorer than Myanmar, Cambodia, but it's basically within that group, right? The kind of the CLM countries, Cambodia, Laos, Myanmar. In terms of human development indicators as well, which is I think in the next slide, HDI. Again, it's kind of hovering at with Laos and Myanmar and Cambodia. So there's a lot of work to be done, whether you're looking at literacy rates and other things. I think a third of its population still lives below the poverty line. So there's a lot of work that still needs to be done in terms of economic development for this country. And they have been receiving a lot of assistance by various development agencies, including the Asian Development Bank, which I also worked in many years ago. So this is a country that continues to depend on external assistance, but also its economic structure is also quite concentrated. It's basically, its main exports have been oil and gas and some coffee, and that accounts for something like 99% of its total exports. So right now, if you look at global supply chains and value chains, it doesn't quite complement the other ASEAN countries right now. Oil and gas, so does Malaysia has oil and gas, so it's a number of countries have oil and gas. Coffee, again, Vietnam is one of the largest producers of coffee. So right now it's more of a net consumer rather than a net contributor to the supply chains. But of course that may change, right? If some of the other ASEAN countries will begin to invest in there, and particularly when it's part of ATIGA or ASEAN, then you might see that new supply chains being created, of which Timor-Leste may be part of. But right now, it's not there, So it may take quite some time for it to be part of those supply chains. So the benefits is there theoretically, but it takes a bit of time to build those supply chains to include Timor-Leste. It has a lot of structural weaknesses, for whether it's legal or regulatory. It has, weak human capital. But you could also say the same for Laos, Myanmar, and Cambodia as well, right? And I think this is where the point is, from an ASEAN perspective, and I've been working in ASEAN economic integration for the longest time, right? One of its persistent internal challenges that would continue to challenge, we talk about the ASEAN economic community, single market, production place, but you need to be more integrated. It cannot be a two-tier ASEAN or a three-tier ASEAN. So basically, all member countries need to benefit from economic integration. And yet, 20 years since Cambodia, Myanmar, Laos have joined, we still have that wide economic divide among member states, right? And having Timor-Leste being part of it just continues to have, you're just in a way perpetuating that economic divide. So that's not Timor-Leste's fault, huh? It's ASEAN's fault too. And one of the things that I have talked about for quite some time is that we need to take a much more holistic approach to how we narrow the development gap. It's not just ASEAN 6 versus the CLMV. Well, CLM actually, Vietnam is actually now richer than the Philippines if you look at it in terms of income per capita. But we take a much more broader approach, right? If it's digital connectivity or different types of aspects of that divide, then it would include countries like the Philippines or even some of the ASEAN 6 countries. So, and that's being done right now. I think some institutions like IRIA have been looking at developing new kinds of frameworks to narrow development divide and to build capacity programs that can be built on that new framework. So I think that's one of the biggest challenge, right? Timor has still got some way to go, but from the ASEAN perspective, of course, you're just kind of increasing those challenges that ASEAN needs to face if it wants to integrate among themselves. So I think there's probably a few more points that I need to bring up, but I think that's one of the biggest issues that I wanted to bring up in terms of policy, is that how do you narrow that development divide when you have Timor is there? It's a fait accompli. Timor is part of ASEAN now, right? That's why the question for this seminar is ASEAN ready for Timor-Leste, not the other way around, right? So we need to see what we can do with our newest member so that we can find a way to bridge that divide. I think I'll stop here and we can open for questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Dennis, for your comprehensive assessment. So we have heard 3 insightful presentations offering different perspectives. I think we can call them normative optimism, legal formalism, and economic realism on whether ASEAN is ready for Timor-Leste. So I have a list of questions, but I'm sure you also have your own questions. So let me open the discussion. And maybe just if you have a question, you can raise your hand and introduce yourself, and you can use your microphone so everybody can hear you. So who would like to ask the first question? Yes, over there at the back.
Hi, my name is John from the MPA program. So my first question is sorry, I didn't get your name. To Johan, yeah, correct. Okay, so what specific elements within the political roadmap that you thought was political? Like what elements, for those who are not aware of the roadmap? Yeah. And then maybe, if I may, there's a second question I would like to ask Dennis. What is the biggest quick wins, or what is the biggest chunk of development work that you think is the most that needs the most priority in Timor-Leste? Yeah. Thank you.
We can collect maybe a few more questions if anybody would like to ask a question. Yes, please.
Hi, Ignatius from Shell. I want to ask about the international law aspect of the Timor-Australia relationship. So they went through the compulsory conciliation, and of course we know the outcome. Can you, Julia particularly, can you update us on where is it now today in terms of that settlement, and also the stability of this agreement in terms of how then Timor can bring this forward? Because there is a piece of huge oil and gas field there that they probably need to quickly develop to bring them up to speed. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for the questions. So maybe we can answer these questions. Johan, would you like to start with the first one?
Thank you. When we talk about political, what do you call it, expectation, right? You can look into the criteria and the milestone for Timor-Leste. When we talk about the political expectation, right? Well, you can see the list of the what we call it, of the milestones in the roadmap. However, this roadmap is actually not public documents, so I'm not sure if I can share this to you or not. Because, let me explain it briefly. When we talk about accession, right, accession is a legal action. So when we talk about a legal action, of course, you need to see the legal basis for accession itself. According to the charter, the legal basis to deal with the accession under, in ASEAN, you need to look into Article 6. So that's all of the legal criteria. However, suddenly this ASEAN member state make this what we call as a roadmap, right? So they list several milestones, which is, I would say, this is not legal criteria at all. So in that sense, of course, I will argue that because this is not legal criteria and this is a legal, this is not legal document, which is this is actually a political documents. I have to say this is also a political expectation. And unfortunately, I cannot show you the political expectation because this is not public documents. I'm really sorry.
Hello. Yeah. So talking about quick wins, I was doing a project years ago, early 2000s, about financial cooperation among the ASEAN member states, and I interviewed back then the central bank governor of Cambodia, right? And I was surprised to find out from them that their financial banking sector is open, 100% open to foreign banks. And they said that they do that too for other sectors, important sectors too. Very different from some of the other sectors where they protect these so-called strategic sectors, right? Banking, finance, telecommunication, but they're open, right? And I asked them, why do you do that, right? They said, look, we just opened up, we just joined ASEAN, but also we're a least developed country. We need foreign investments, we need foreign expertise. So one of the quick wins, I think, for a country like Timor is, creating that opportunity for foreign investments, opening up for foreign investments, foreign expertise to come in. I don't know what maybe Julia or Johan will know whether there's any foreign limits in terms of investing in different sectors, including the banking sector. But I know for Cambodia it was 100% open, all right? And two, the other quick on the trade side, of course, is that the most important thing is for them to join ATIGA first, because there's always been this thing about trade, right? Particularly cutting tariffs and enjoying the concessions from these trade tariffs. As I mentioned, 99% of tariffs within ASEAN are already duty-free, right? So the quicker they join the ATIGA, the quicker they can enjoy those trade concessions, both in terms of imports and exports, right? And that will also encourage particularly foreign investors, as well as ASEAN investors, to start setting up shop and factory. So to me, the first thing they should do is to quickly be party to the league. I think Johan said they're not yet there. I don't know how long it will take, but I think the most important thing is that particular agreement, and then maybe the next one will be the investment agreement. All right, thank you.
Test, okay. Oh, what?
Oh, wait, she has one.
Should I answer? I have, yeah. And I thought of a way to break the impasse between me and Johan. So he's a de jure or de jure guy. I'm a de facto. If you talk about is Timor an actual ASEAN member, because we had a little, prior to this panel, we were talking about that. So I think if you look at recognition or membership of ASEAN in those two different ways, and like Dennis said, like it or not, they're in lah. We can't give it back lah. No returning it to the shop. Shopee won't take it back. I'll take it reverse order. So to your question about the Timor gap, right? It's a good question. It's been a long-standing issue, years and years, decades. In 2018, there was a maritime treaty signed, so they agreed on basically a median line, designating a clear maritime boundary between Timor and Australia. Australia is Timor's closest neighbor, closest large middle power neighbor, if you will. And Australians actually have a sort of, if you will, sympathy and almost personal. Every Australian academic I've met who works on Timor issues, it's a sort of moral obligation to help Timor succeed because they've gone through that whole period under Indonesia and after that, and a lot of Australian peacekeepers have turned into academics or think tankers or whatever, consultants, and a lot of them work on Timor and work in Timor. That being said, yes, there have been disagreements. When I first went to Timor in July 2023, in one of the avenues that has all the embassies and one or two Timorese think tanks and institutions, there was this huge banner with a picture of an oil refinery, and Australia stole our money, graffitied on that. There's a lot of nascent domestic anger. There's a lot of, if you will, difficulties. If you can argue that the leadership may sweep it under the rug, but I think Ramos-Horta at least is very pragmatic. So he has, as a country, the country's position is they would rather actually work with Australian and Japanese partners to now develop this refining of the oil and gas byproducts, if you will. So it's not confirmed yet, but the thinking now, I think, after this, there was a consultation and a consultancy report that came out late last year. Max Lane and I wrote a chapter that came out early this year, sorry. So I think the LNG plant, if it's built, will be in Timor. I think that's the current thinking. This will be a good move. This will bring jobs. This will bring different revenue. They won't be a Singapore, right? It won't be like that, but at least that's a step in the right direction. You will diversify the economy a little bit more. The money from oil and gas is running out, will run out, there's no question about it. So Timor doesn't have a choice, but indications are they are not looking at Chinese partners, they are not even looking at Kuwaiti partners, they are preferring Japanese and Australian partners. The other question that Dennis was talking about, unless Barbara wants me to answer it. The one that you said, maybe Johan or I might answer about foreign, what was it at the end?
I think foreign limits, investment limits.
I am not 100% sure, so I must go. But I would generally note it's a very nascent economy. This is anecdotal and doesn't quite answer the question. If you're a tourist, it's a US dollar as in hard cash economy. There's no QR payment at this point. It's very, you hail a pirate taxi off the road and they're like $5 or $10 anywhere, and it's cash. It's a cash economy. There are very few, Wi-Fi and all that. It's not a very connected place. One of my colleagues likes to joke, it's a bit like going back to the 80s or even, I won't say 70s. So it's patchy. The infrastructure is patchy, logistics are patchy. Public transport is a mess. They have these little mobile things that the locals take, but very few foreigners dare to take. So I ended up walking 4 km one way or another for the conference because I got sick of hailing pirate cabs that had no license and it would tell me like, oh, the police just stopped me, but it's okay, hop into my cab. So I think there's a long way to go, just like Dennis said, but without taking much more time, I think some of these gaps will definitely be plugged. And if you want to take a slightly less judgy view of accession, if you think of accession as ASEAN has committed to Timor to take it in, Timor has committed to ASEAN to join and to fulfill all the requirements. If you read on the face of it, Article 6 in the ASEAN Charter, it has fulfilled. It has fulfilled. It has open embassies in every ASEAN state, right, and more. It has geographic proximity, or it's situated in Southeast Asia. It completes the map. The other two requirements, if you will, I mean, you can be nitpicky about it and say, oh, they haven't signed, they haven't acceded to the various legal instruments. Yes, but if you argue, if you study international law, one of the first things you study is you have a mother law or mother norm. You've already accepted, you've recognized Timor as a member. Everything else is gravy, if you will. In action, in practice, it is already done. Do you know what I mean? Yeah.
Julia, okay. Maybe before I will interject with one question. Sorry, because you mentioned infrastructure, right? So I read some analysis that some analysts are saying that because China is actually the most right now the most important economic and strategic partner in Timor-Leste. So some observers worry that if now Timor-Leste becomes the most pro-China ASEAN member, what do you think the impact will be? Do you think that it might create some lack of cohesion in ASEAN, or Timor-Leste will start diversifying more? What's your? I mean, any of you can answer this question.
I'll hop in very quickly on this. In both closed and open door forums, at least the Timorese diplomats will tell you they are not bound to China. And just that example that I gave about the Timor Gap, it's clear they're not choosing China. They have famously also not taken Chinese loans. They admittedly, yes, China was among the first state, if not the first state to recognize Timor when they were reclaiming their independence in 2002. However, even though China has built the presidential palace, has built roads, the Japanese and the Koreans have helped a lot. The Australians and the US have also helped. The Aussie defense people help very constantly. And I think Timor, like Singapore, cannot be picky. It is a very young country. It is akin to Singapore in the 70s, if not even more, because they've suffered war and trauma. So I think a lot of the statements made about, oh, look, they're so close, then I'm like, Singapore also takes Chinese investments. What? You've got to be a little more pragmatic, I think, when you're a small country and you need development and you need it fast, you need it yesterday. So I think pragmatically they recognize the Chinese do have money. However, I think they have no doubts that it can come with conditions, but they're very, very keen not to appear as though they are bound to China. I'll stop there. You want to say anything about that?
Dennis, would you like to add? Okay. Okay. Yes, please. Feel free to ask a question.
It's not really a question, it's more of a series of questions. My name is Chris Fussner. I'm a businessman here in electronic manufacturing equipment, but I do democracy work as a sideline or a hobby. So I was part of the IRI, International Republican Institute, election observation mission to Timor-Leste in 2017. And I volunteered for someplace outside of Dili, and they put me into Bakau, which was absolutely wonderful. And the election was free and fair. We worked hours, 12, 14 hours that day. Being there, this is again 2017, but I don't think things have changed. So you still have oil and gas, coffee to a degree. But when I was there, what sort of hit me, and seeing all these ASEAN country names, the easiest thing for ASEAN to do is hotel chain investment. That would be the easiest, at least on a smaller scale. You're not going to have Marina Bay Sands in Bakau, right? But you're going to have smaller, and then tourism, they have a great potential for tourism, both on the shore, scuba diving, and beaches. But don't go swimming in Bakau, because that's where they have saltwater crocodiles. And another thing is, if Singapore has a Peace Corps, and I think you do have somewhat of a Peace Corps, this would be a good place to send some of your Peace Corps volunteers. I think you could do a lot of work. I think the country obviously has a long way to advance. But if you look at Myanmar, half of the country is in a civil war. So I think one thing that Timor-Leste has is a unity, and their political leadership is very, very good. And when I was there was 21 political parties, and they did a good job. So my thing is, for economic development, what do? Manufacturing is going to be very difficult. To compete on garments, with Vietnam, China to a degree, but now Bangladesh. I was in Bangladesh 2 weeks ago on a pre-election mission. Footwear with Vietnam. It's going to be tough to get a manufacturing group. Another thing is population. The population is not all that great. So it's a lot of work to do, but the low-hanging fruit to me would be ASEAN hotel chains. So, thank you.
My first quick response is good for you. And my second quick response to the hotel, if you go, so in the span of 2 years, so I went for a conference in July 2023, even just 2 years, they've built a new road around the Cristo Rey Park. There are new hotels, but I think, again, the caveat that I mentioned much earlier when I was talking, I think, and after speaking to some Timorese people, the need is for sustainable tourism. So I shudder a little bit when we talk about tourism because we see what damage tourism can do. So if you look at Bali, if you look at all the silly people who, I'm not on Instagram, but people who, influencers, right? So I think that the Timorese leadership understand, hopefully, that you can have tourism, but it must be sustainable.
Yeah, I was thinking more of adventure tourism.
Yeah.
With
so
scuba diving, not misadventure tourism,
that's right.
but scuba diving, the mountains, things like that.
And then the other point about political leadership being good, up to a point, I think the real domestic challenge, and we haven't really talked about that, is they need to plan for succession because most of your leaders are in their 70s. So right now the youth, so they had a demonstration, they rioted about a month and a half ago when the parliamentarians were trying to give themselves free cars. And the university students came out in Delhi and rioted and protested. And to their credit, the government actually backtracked and canceled that plan. So I think that's a good sign, but I won't go as far as to say the politics works out, because I think there is sadly a lack of planning for succession.
Thank you. So let's collect a few more questions, please.
Hi, thank you to all three speakers for broaching the difficult questions after the feel-good moment at the summit. My name is Sue. I'm Johan's colleague at the Center for International Law, also working on ASEAN. I have a question that is primarily for Dennis. So I'm really glad that you brought up Antigua could be like the biggest benefit for Timor. And that's ASEAN's biggest selling point, right? It's the free trade area, the economic community, and particularly the network of FTAs that ASEAN has. Have you a vision, or have you heard from other people how it would map out, how Timor's joining and accession and operationalization of these agreements might actually happen? Obviously, there's a big step, and in the previous accessions, there was a lot of tiered implementation or requirements for the new members. But if you have any idea of how that might happen. And secondly, what do you think will be reshaped in ASEAN's economic relations with its dialogue partners, with all of the FTA upgrades that ASEAN hopes to do, the cooperation that we hope to expand with this new dynamic of this new member who is so little developed and also has such a strong dependence on foreign aid? How do you think the dynamic will change? Thank you.
I think your first question, I think it's already happening. So in a sense that, I'm not a lawyer, so I'm not going to talk about the legal instruments, but I know that Timor officials, whether at the technical level, whether it's in trade, in customs, they've been attending these meetings, so they've been preparing them already to join. So leaving out the legal side, I think they are getting in a way they're getting themselves ready for being part of Antigua. And that also includes the single window, right? I mean, the customs facilitation, they have their own national window, like other ASEAN member states, which will eventually become being part of the ASEAN single window, which unfortunately needs to be digitized. So I don't know how far back they are, but again, they are, I think they're getting a lot of help from developing partners to get them ready. So in that sense, I think that aspect, I think, is happening already, right? How will it reshape their relationship with their dialogue partners? That's an interesting question too, because in a sense that in a way it might even reinvigorate that technical assistance to support that, because right now they've been helping Cambodia, Myanmar, Laos for years, right? And increasingly so. I mean, I was just talking to some of the UK officials, and they're providing some new technical assistance, so to get them ready to join the ASEAN Economic Community, and there's a new strategic plan that's been launched. So in that sense, I probably see increased activities from dialogue partners in helping essentially the least developed member state to be part of the AAC. So in that sense, I see that more activities. But I have a big gripe here that's more on ASEAN, right? Is that, and that's nothing to do with Timor itself, is that whenever we talk about these big regional projects, right, we always talk about the fact, who can help us with that, right? Whether is it going to be Australia, is it going to be UK or Japan, when really need to work among ourselves and say, hey, we have agency on our own. We should be working together rather than depending too much on our development partners in helping here. So I think that's the same with Timor, right? Yeah, so they'll get a lot of technical assistance and help from Australia particularly. But what about us, whether it's Singapore, Malaysia, others? You talk about hotel as a possible driver of growth. And I remember in Myanmar, way before things went haywire there was a lot of big investments. I think the Raffles Group was one of the biggest hotels in Yangon was a Raffles hotel. So again, there's a lot. There should be a lot of interest in. You leave it to the private sector. You facilitate, but leave it to the private sector to find new drivers of growth in industries that can help. It may not be in manufacturing, but it could be in tourism, sustainable tourism. It could be in hotel or other kinds of services. Maybe even financial services. I mean, in many ways, right now, because of Trump tariffs and this growing concerns of rising trade protectionism, ASEAN countries are trying to look ways to diversify their markets. As I mentioned, create new supply chains, not just about reconfiguration. The concern now is of onshoring, moving some of these operations back to the US or near the US. But what about new supply chain, new industries that we can work on? Some of the new areas that includes things like including the green transitions, the green economy, digitalization. These are new areas and new industries where new supply chains can grow, and maybe to some extent Timor could be part of that new industries as well. But you need to leave it to the private sector to do it. You just need to step aside and help them and facilitate. I'll stop here.
Johan, would you like to add anything on these questions about ATIGA or external partners?
Maybe I would like to say something about ASEAN. So when we talk about ASEAN membership, you need to differentiate the membership before the charter and post-charter. Before the charter, there is no obligation for ASEAN member state to be a parties to ASEAN legal instruments. But post-charter, they need to be a parties. Of course, Timor-Leste now already becoming ASEAN member state. But as ASEAN member state, they also have a requirement to follow all of the legal instruments that already been signed and ratified by member state. Let me give you, for an example. There is a treaty, we call it as a Treaty of Mutual Legal Assistance in Criminal Matters. So it means that every ASEAN member state shall provide assistance related to the criminal legal matters. For example, if Indonesia need an evidence from Thai Attorney General's office, they can request it to Thailand Attorney General's office. And because you are party to this ASEAN EMBLAT, you have to provide this assistance. Let's say Timor-Leste is not party to this treaty, EMBLAT treaty. So when Indonesia have problems and then they need assistance from Timor-Leste, Timor-Leste doesn't have any obligation to do this kind of thing. So it's becoming a problem, So when we talk about ASEAN membership, it's not only about becoming, participant in ASEAN Summit, no. You need to, follow all law and regulations stipulated under ASEAN treaties. And there are around 400 treaties. It's not easy to do it, but it takes time. But the problem right now is that before Timor-Leste becoming parties to these 400 ASEAN legal instruments, they already becoming full ASEAN member. Well, you are becoming ASEAN members, but you cannot do a lot of what they call it obligation under the treaties. So what's the point? So what's the point of for Timor-Leste becoming ASEAN member state? Politically, yeah, it's good. At least all ASEAN member state, all countries in Southeast Asia becoming ASEAN member state now. But you cannot do anything, you know. You cannot provide, I mean, Timor-Leste doesn't have any legal obligation, for example, related to ATIGA. You cannot give like zero tariff to, I mean, you can, but you have no legal obligation.
But how long will it take? How long will it take to be part
well,
of ATIGA?
It depends, you know. When we talk about trade in goods, right? The obligation stipulated in the ASEAN economic agreements compared to the ASEAN political security agreements are different. Let me give you an example. For the APSC, what is the obligation? It's simply what's stipulated within the text of the articles. But when we talk about ATIGA, it's not only about the text, but it's also about, for example, a tariff reduction schedule. For this tariff reduction schedule, you need to negotiate. And you know, every member state have their own national interests. And of course, Timor-Leste need to negotiate with each of them. And how long it takes, I don't know. It's going to be fast if, for example, Indonesia said, okay, I want you to do this. And then Timor-Leste said, okay, accept it. But is that possible? Logically speaking, I don't think so. Because Timor-Leste also have their internal interests. I mean, you know, when we talk about international organization, it's not simply as the membership itself. There are a lot of variables that you need to consider. Trade in goods, trade in services, and that trade in investment. For me, Indonesian, for example, you know, when I see a lot of Chinese coming to Indonesia and then working as what they call it, as blue-collar workers in Indonesia, I cannot accept that. Because, you know, as Indonesian, it's not easy for us to get job. So can you imagine, for example, there are 500 million of ASEAN citizens. Let's say just 10%. How much is this? 50 million, right? 50 millions of ASEAN citizens go to Timor-Leste and then take the locals' job. Is that fair? Of course not. So in that sense, you need to negotiate, you know, the movement of person. Whether or not if you are establishing like, let's say I want to establish like a law firm in Timor-Leste, right? To do a legal services. However, when I do this, all of my lawyers are coming from Indonesia. Can you do that? Of course that's problematic, you know.
Can they be Portuguese?
Well, I don't know. That's why you need to negotiate.
No, I believe they're doing it.
Yeah, but as of today, you know, there is no, what do you call it? Maybe there is a negotiation. But negotiation does not mean anything as long as you don't sign or ratify the text of the treaty, you know. So once you try, once you ratify, then it's becoming your law, and then you have to follow it.
I think my very quick two-finger response is I think we sometimes risk going into too much detail and only thinking that ASEAN is the only thing in town. Timor has its own reputation as a nation state to keep. Timor has other international obligations as a member of the United Nations. It's up to Timor domestically if it wants to decide to mutually cooperate on a legal arrangement. It does not need necessarily to accede to an ASEAN agreement on certain things. It has agency under international law in its own right. No, I take your point. I'm not trying to, you know, and we should get whoever it is who has a question to, yeah. But I just wanted a quick to think.
Okay, so let's do another round of questions. Yes, please.
I'm an Australian American.
Press, yes, we can. Now it
I'm an Australian American. Lived in Singapore several times. I'm his guest. I live in Europe. So when you talk about the EU, this is the way they handle it. Just to say this, once you become a member, Brussels is very important. You, of course, have obligations like you have mentioned. However, there's also the free movement of people, as you know. And what happens there, though, from the Brussels side, which is, I think, the most important from the ASEAN side, is that they have a development fund. And then you put in your priorities, and then they come up with money for you. Now, they regulate that, they watch it closely, but it works. And regardless, and by the way, I've also lived in Hungary, where Viktor Orban is, and he constantly complains about everything, but still he takes the money, right? And then I now live in France. So, and I also know what Brexit did to push out when the UK left. So there's a lot of different things that can be said, plus and minus, about the EU. It's under threat, as you know. However, it's a very powerful organization that does have rules, like you're talking about. It not only has laws, it has movement of people. So my question is that, and maybe to this gentleman over here, isn't now, or to you, you've been talking about doing this for 30 years, isn't it time for ASEAN to step up to the plate and have a similar kind of thing, instead of talking about, loosely about who's going to do what? And, it's nice that you say that about the United Nations, but we all know the United Nations these days is pretty impotent. And so, so that at ASEAN, there's a void. In that void, if you want to avoid Chinese dominance, ASEAN has a fantastic role. So I'm not, this maybe not the forum, but when you mentioned the EU, I just wanted to say there is another way.
Now, you want to?
My quick answer is the EU and ASEAN are different in terms of how they started. The EU was literally born out of, if you will, the coal and security community, and it was meant always to be a security community, whereas ASEAN was never designed to be a security community. It was started for different reasons, but that in and of itself set these two different organizations on very different paths. So in a way, it's a bit like comparing apples to oranges, but your point is well taken.
Yeah, maybe I just chime in that I think even from the beginning, first and foremost, the European Union is a customs union, and even from the beginning, even among ASEANs, when they were talking about the economic community, that was 20 years ago, it was never, they never even talked about a customs union. So even though it connotes a European Union, the ASEAN Economic Community is not anything like the European Union. And you talk about stabilization funds that help to have some sort of economic parity, particularly among the southern European states, Spain and others. Well, it's going to be very tough because most of the member states in ASEAN don't have that kind of resources that France or Germany or the UK had to build up this huge fund to basically help, particularly Spain, I think, and Ireland to reach that economic parity. So that's the problem, I think, that we don't have that fund, and also it's not that same kind of model that it's never going to be that. That's what I'm saying. I think we should take that question first.
Yes, there were a few questions over there. Yes, please, in the back.
Sir, my question to the panel is how many different types of enforcement agencies are there in Timor-Leste? My name is W2. I'm from the community of Singapore and West Johor. From my perspective and experience, there has been a lot of talk about the legal procedures and the laws, regulations. However, enforcement is lacking. So what is more important is the enforcement of the laws, the rules, the regulations. Timor-Leste works on a Portuguese hybrid law system, legal system. How are you going to interface this understanding of concepts with perhaps the ASEAN legal charter, if I may use the word? Because I can foresee some misunderstandings in the interpretation of law and in the interpretation of actions. So my question basically is enforcement. What enforcement agencies do you have right now? Or would you be preparing for more enforcement agencies in the near future to implement and enforce the laws? Thank you.
Thank you so much for your question. Let's try to collect a few more questions. if there are any. Yes, please.
I always observe that ASEAN is always trained to include the countries from very east, not from the west also, because Bangladesh, India, they are very adjacent to the Myanmar. Myanmar is a member of ASEAN, but ASEAN never accept application from Bangladesh. You know, our chief advisor wanted his wish to join ASEAN, but but it's very surprising to me that ASEAN never look at west. They always look to the very west, east, too, because they are now planning to accept Japan, and maybe someday they will accept China also.
Interesting question, thank you. Okay, so let's start with the question on enforcement, maybe. Johan?
Okay, regarding enforcement mechanism. So when we talk about ASEAN, it's simply international law regime, you know. When we talk about ASEAN, it's simply international law regime. There is no enforcement mechanism exists in ASEAN. So it means that when ASEAN enter into agreements, there is no supranational body that will force all of the ASEAN treaties. So the implementation depends on each member state. However, in ASEAN, we have a monitoring system. For example, in the case of ASEAN Mutual Legal Assistance in Criminal Matters. So there is one sectoral body, we call it ASEAN SOM-EMLAT. So these sectoral bodies, or what do you call it? They consist of Director General of Ministry of Law and Human Rights, Attorney General's Chambers, and etc. So for example, every year they will have a meeting. So during this meeting, they will check on the implementation of ASEAN Mutual Legal Assistance in Criminal Matters. For example, how many requests has been made and how many requests has been addressed. And if there are some requests has not been addressed, what is the problem? So only up to that level. So for example, Indonesia unable to execute 3 requests, there will be no punishment at all. But later they will ask, okay, Indonesia, what is your problem? And how to do it? I mean, how to solve this problem? Is there any things that we need to do or how? So what's happened in the ASEAN international law itself is that even if we don't have an enforcement agency, but we have a monitoring system. So in the end of the day, this is always the problem in international law, you know. If you go to the UN level also, you know, even if there is like International Court of Justice decision, and one country, for example, they don't want to implement it, nothing can be done. Unless, for example, US force you to do so. So this is what happens in reality. Unlike the EU, for example. In the EU, if you don't want to comply with EU regulation of decision, they will stop the budget, as simply as that. But in ASEAN, we don't have that kind of mechanism. But we do have ASEAN Fund for development. So every member state have to pay around 1 million. In relation to, sorry?
Small, not
I know, but still money, you know, but still money. But this is the problem with Timor-Leste. As of today, they are not party to this agreement. So can you imagine that you are a member of ASEAN, you have veto power in the decision making, but you don't pay this 1 million money. For me, it's unfair. As an Indonesian, I don't like it. Thank you.
So I think I think that similar point there, right? The European Union has supranational institutions. So the European Court of Justice with its EU directors, member states in the EU need to comply. Legally, they have to comply, right? These sort of institutions do not exist in ASEAN, and they never will exist. I mean, I don't think ASEAN leaders want any other supranational institution to exist, where a court of justice, although that would help in terms of enforcement. So enforcement is not just a problem in Timor-Leste, it's a problem for all ASEAN member states. One way is, as what Johan mentioned, is to have much more robust monitoring and evaluation systems to try to get members to comply with these agreements. Is one way to do it, because there's no other kinds of mechanisms. ASEAN do have a dispute settlement mechanism, particularly on the trade side, but as far as I know, it's never been used, right? So, but maybe one day it might, I don't know. But right now, there isn't one. I think to answer your question as well, it's really up to the political leaders whether they want to decide to expand membership to include other countries. But geographically, I think Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, they're all part of South Asia, so I'm not too sure whether, but even the same with China, Japan, they're part of East Asia, so I don't think they'll be, they would be part of ASEAN. But again, it's up to the political leaders, the leadership in ASEAN, whether they want to expand that membership. But I don't think so anytime soon.
I'll jump in there just to answer your question. I wanted to clarify with you, I assumed you meant when you mentioned the Northeast Asian countries that ASEAN has accepted them in terms of the ASEAN +3 summit, right? So if you look at the ASEAN Charter, yes, Dennis is right. Membership, full membership is limited to only the region of Southeast Asia. So after all, the name is ASEAN, Association of Southeast Asian Nations. At the time that ASEAN was instituted in 1967, it was because these initially 5 states, and then later Brunei, when it became independent in 1984, they were all fledgling, small, not even middle powers, trying to get over a really hard time with the Vietnam War and other things going on. It was the Cold War. So I think in many ways, ASEAN may have outgrown its own charter. In many ways, ASEAN now has convening power that probably the founding members never envisioned in 1967. But again, like Dennis said, and South Asia has its own different geopolitical tensions and issues, but also it is geographically very far away. There is something called the Indian Ocean that stops us from, so one of the, if you look at it from a, if you will, the world's perspective or geopolitical perspective, crossing nations to project power, or even crossing oceans to make friends, right? To have strong multilateral and bilateral ties is a hard thing. India is an emerging power, but India also at the same time has domestic issues, and all the Southeast Asian countries have issues, even the richest ones, even the biggest ones. I find some of the comments and all that a little sensitive, because I think we're looking at Timor and being a little bit unfair. We're kind of expecting this very new country, very new member who's been through a lot, to suddenly run as fast as, for instance, Singapore. Tidak mungkin. It's not going to happen. But if everyone is a bit patient with ASEAN and with Timor, I think someday, maybe when I'm long gone, hopefully retired and or dead, someday, it will happen. Question at the back.
Yes, please, at the back. You can ask the question. No, press the button.
Okay, so hi, I'm Kenny. I'm from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Singapore, ASEAN Department. One of my team's responsibilities is to work with Timor-Leste issue. We work with them prior to ascension, and one of our responsibilities is to help them integrate into ASEAN. So allow me to offer a practitioner's perspective, but it is my personal perspective as well. I think when we deal with ASEAN, you got to see, some people see it from a negative perspective. You can be an optimist, but it's important to be a realist. So let's look at the facts at hand. And I just want to respond to Mr. Johan's point. As of the summit, Timor-Leste has concluded negotiations on 27. Priority 1, ASEAN economic agreements. And you might recall that 27 out of the list of 66 priority 1 agreements is, I will consider to be good progress. And then look at the roadmap. It has over 216 economic agreements filed over 3 priority lists that allows Timor-Leste to accede to them within a time frame of 3 to 5 years. So we are working hard with them, and from what interactions I had with them so far, it appears that they are very earnest. It takes time. I believe Atiga upgrade, they should have their main offer, and I think the AMS have to agree to whatever they have to offer. But in I think the bigger question that we have asked is Timor-Leste ready to take up the responsibilities of membership, which goes beyond accession to agreements, but rather what kind of role will they play in ASEAN, right? When they have to manage, eventually they have to manage external partnerships, they have to manage a dialogue partner as a country coordinator. How effective would they be when ASEAN credibility is at stake? If we do not manage our relations with one partner well, what they say and do in meetings can set the tone as well, because now they have a right to comment on any topic under all the agenda items. So, and actually this is a question to the panelists in general. How do you think Timor-Leste will be as an ASEAN member state? Are they going to be a rational actor? Are they going to toe the ASEAN position on most issues, if not with all positions? What kind of role can they play? Constructive? Potentially destabilizing? It's an open question. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That's a very pertinent question. I think it's linked to your point about being outspoken, right? Because that raises a lot of questions when we think about contentious issues like Myanmar, for example, right? If you are very outspoken, that might create some tension within ASEAN. So maybe, yeah, Julia, you can start, and then Dennis and Johan, you can add.
I'm going to put on my... Thank you very much, though. I appreciate, I think all of us do appreciate the practitioner's perspective. And I think that's important to say. So to me, one test is Singapore has shifted its stance, basically, from a country that steadfastly refused to let Timor enter ASEAN, as they say. 14 years they had to wait. We were always amongst the naysayers, together with Laos briefly, later Myanmar. Suddenly changed, then we helped them. One of the Timorese diplomats told me, "You are the most pragmatic country in the world. But when you all help us, thank you. It was tough, but we will get there because you helped us." So I think in terms of, if you're a constructivist, which I am, since I believe in international law and only constructivists do, sort of, Timor has been socialized already, has started to be socialized into ASEAN. And there is a so-called ASEAN way. Yes, it gets trampled upon and people don't like it. Europeans and Americans often, I did my grad school at Georgetown in Washington, D.C. I lived in the US for 16 and a half years, so I know what I'm talking about. It's a different way. I don't want to make cultural excuses, but even blunt Timor, I think, when looking at ASEAN as a mantle, when looking at ASEAN chairmanship, they're kind of freaking out because they know they have to organize somehow 1,000 meetings a year. They currently don't have that capacity. But again, there are ways that ASEAN and other member states can help them along with. The other point quickly is, one of you said define rational, right? Basic IR definition of rational, ability to calculate costs and benefit. I think it has done its calculations. I think ASEAN has made it wait long enough. And I give you the counter example. If you still have Myanmar in ASEAN, what are we talking about? How low is your bar? That's all I'm going to say.
For me, well, Timor-Leste membership is, it depends, you know. If they becoming parties to all of ASEAN agreements, that's good. But if they are not parties to some ASEAN agreements, that's going to be problematic. Because like what you said, I know that they have concluded some negotiation for the AEC, right? But for me, if you look into the charter, that's not enough, you know. Just because you concluded a negotiation, it doesn't mean you are party to these agreements. ASEAN is a rules-based organization. This is the commitment made by 10 ASEAN member states. If you want to stick to these rules and claim yourself as a rules-based organization, means that Timor-Leste, as a new member state, need to be a party to all ASEAN agreements first, before they ratify, before they submit instrument of accession to ASEAN, to the ASEAN Charter. That's what the law said, you know. I mean, of course, there is a lot of political consideration that you need to consider. And Indonesia is one of the countries that quite, what we call it, since the beginning, we really supporting Timor-Leste accession to ASEAN. But again, support is not enough. You need to be really, really pragmatic because of the requirement under the Charter. But we will see what's happening in the future. I hope Timor-Leste can be parties to all of this ASEAN agreement. If that's happened, that's going to be good. Of course, there might be some problems here and there. And I think that's not only Timor-Leste problem. Even all ASEAN member states, all of them unable to meet all of the requirements stipulated in this ASEAN legal instrument. So what should we do? Of course, we need to assist each other. We need maybe we should ask Germany to provide technical assistance to what they have done to CLMP countries. Maybe they will do the same with Timor-Leste. So that's what I would say. Thank you.
Okay, I think we need to get, it's a similar point, right? We need to get a bit realistic here that Timor is not going to be Singapore tomorrow, right? It's a transitional, well, that's one, but two, it's a transitional economy, very much like Cambodia, Laos, Myanmar. Vietnam, of course, is graduated. It's a long road ahead for Timor. But I think to answer your question is what kind of ASEAN member state it will be, right? I think from the economic point of view, right, it's going to be very similar to Cambodia, Laos. It wants to catch up, right? So it wants to have foreign investments. It wants to be part of these agreements so that there'll be an increase in foreign investments and trade, so that it can, in terms of economic growth, it can catch up with the rest, right? But at the same time, it's very different. Huh? It's a very different kind of country from Cambodia, Laos, Myanmar. Those countries, when they joined as well, were also very different. But this is a very democratic state, which probably have different priorities from them. So it won't just be on economic alone. It may be asking for different kinds of things, or it may raise its voice on other issues beyond economic growth and other things, because it's quite different. It has quite a different history. So I'll be interested to see, as they move along over the years, to see what they will be. But I think you might find they're quite different from the other CNMV countries, yeah, in that sense. I think we're running out of time, so maybe we should, yeah.
2 minutes left, so I would like to ask the panelists, do you have any concluding remarks you would like to highlight? Okay. Julia?
Timor doesn't want to be Singapore. Timor doesn't want to be any of the other 9 AMS. Timor is Timor. So I think once we get over that, we will see things from a different point of view. I think a lot of these questions seem to presuppose we know what Timor wants.
Thank you. Johan, any concluding remarks?
Well, I hope Timor-Leste can be parties to all of ASEAN agreements. That's all.
Thank you so much. So that was a very thought-provoking 90 minutes. And with that, first of all, I would like to thank the panel for their time. It is very much appreciated that you join us for this session. Also, I would like to thank you, our audience, for being engaged with your questions. And yeah, I wish everyone a great evening. Thank you so much.